I got an interesting question from members of our community about my story from a 45-year sentence to earning freedom. And they said that they don't have a definitive video that explains that story of how do you go from a 45-year sentence to earning freedom and running a nonprofit. Well, I will say that is a very long story. In fact, if you have not yet received a copy of Earning Freedom, Conquering a 45-Year Sentence, I'd love to send you one. You can get it on Audible. You can get it through a paperback book. Because for me to wrap all that up into a relatively short video is difficult to do. But I am going to tell you the story the best that I can, as long as I'm sitting here waiting for my work. I'm actually working, chauffeuring around my sister right now. I'm in Miami. And so I'm sitting here at the hospital. I'm going to make this video and talk about that story. I made a lot of really bad decisions as a young man. I was 20 years old when I was here in Miami, ironically, and I saw the movie Scarface, and it just put me on this path of trafficking in cocaine. With the wisdom of a 20-year-old, I believed that if I didn't get caught with drugs, I wasn't really breaking the law. So I proceeded to hire other people to pick up the drugs, transport the drugs, sell the drugs for me. And I was like the wizard behind the scenes putting it together. And as a result, authorities charged me with what's a very severe crime called a continuing criminal enterprise and exposed me to a very long time in prison. I was guilty, but I didn't want to accept the bad decisions that I had made. And so I went to trial. And even though I knew I was guilty, not only did I go to trial, I took the witness stand and I perjured myself on the witness stand and said I didn't do it. The jury saw through all of that. And I really believe that the fact of me perjuring myself in the courtroom was just as severe of a bad decision as selling cocaine, because the judge took that as disrespect for his courtroom. And at the end of the day, he sentenced me to 45 years in federal prison. I didn't even know what that meant because I'd spent my first year in solitary confinement. By the time I got to the penitentiary, all I knew is that I hated being in prison and I needed a plan to get me out. I'd love to say I came up with my own plan, but the reality is that I read books, and those books helped to change the way that I think. Starting with the Bible, the parable of the talents just gave me a mindset that said, God blesses us all with certain gifts and talents, and it's our job to develop them. If we do, God's going to bless us with more. If we don't, God's going to take away what we have. And I started to come to terms that I was in prison because I'd squandered a lot of opportunities, and rightfully so. But I had to come up with my plan to get through, and I learned that from Frederick Douglass, from Socrates, from business leaders like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and reading these books that helped change the way that I think. And I came up with a plan that said I'm going to spend every day of my life that I serve in prison focusing on 3 prongs. One of them would be to get an education. The second prong would be to contribute to society in meaningful, measurable ways. And the third would be to build a strong support network. And I believe that if I did that, I would put myself or advance myself as a candidate for better opportunities in the future. And through that path, I got a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree, and then I became an author. My whole mission was to try and change the system so there would be more pathways for people to earn freedom through merit, meaning the harder you work, the better off you are going to advance your life. And this was a concept that wasn't well received in the mid-1980s, early 1990s when I was writing about it. But I always had this vision that this is how I was going to build meaning in my life, just like Frederick Douglass built meaning in his life by using his personal story of living as an enslaved person to advocate for the abolition of slavery. I wanted to use a personal story to advocate for higher levels of liberty for people who work to earn it. I felt that was American, right? America, the harder you work, in theory, the more opportunities are going to open for you, and the higher you're going to be able to develop a quality of life. I believe that the same system should apply everywhere in America, but in prison it does not. In prison, a judge imposes a sentence, And then the individual has to serve the sentence, and it's measured justice. We measure justice by how many calendar pages turn. And that's a terrible system, in my view. And it's what I work to change, and it's what I've been working to change for many decades. But there were different levels of preparation for success, right? After I got my bachelor's degree in 1992, I got a master's degree when I was in about my 7th year of imprisonment. And then I became an author. I began writing books about the prison system. Had to build a pathway to make that happen, which I describe in Earning Freedom. Earning Freedom, the book, is really that whole story of how did I overcome all these complications of getting from a high security penitentiary to a medium security prison, to a low security prison, to a minimum security prison. How did I build income streams while I was in prison? And that was all part of a strategy because I believed that I would always be unemployable. So it would be very important for me to figure out ways to develop my own income streams and own pathways to being financially independent so I could do what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was work to change the law, but there's no money in that. So I knew that I'd have to find a way to earn money, and I would train myself by the books that I read, the self-directed learning I would do in prison, with hopes that it would help me build a career, and hopes that I would have enough money in the bank when I got out to last for a full year, regardless of whether I got a job or not. And because of the plan that I put in place, I walked out of prison with about $100,000 in the bank. So I didn't walk out with zero. In fact, when I walked out of prison, I used to argue that I'm the only guy that would have to take a pay cut when he got out of prison because I'd earned so much money in prison. By publishing books and then using the small revenues that came from publishing, I learned how to invest while I was in prison, and I invested those funds in stocks, and those stocks grew in value, and they allowed me to have a higher level of liberty in prison and also when I came home. So because of all of that work that I prepped for while I was in prison, I found the love of my life and got married inside of a federal prison to Carol. She and I have been married now since June 24th, 2003. So this year in June, just next month, we'll be celebrating our this is 2026, so our 23rd year of marriage. And I love her more today than I did at any time. I'm just really was blessed. And that goes back to what I learned from the Bible. If you work hard on yourself, God is going to open more opportunities for you. When I got out of prison, I'd set a goal with my wife that says I'm going to earn my first $1 million within 5 years. And, it was, not because I wanted to be a millionaire, so to speak, and live as a rich person, although I guess I do. It was more so that I would have enough money that I could do what I wanted to do, work to change the law, and I needed money to do that. So I started off realizing, God, I'm never going to get $1 million by getting a job. In fact, I don't even think I can get a good job. I've got to find a way to acquire appreciating assets and appreciating markets. And I started with real estate. And in my journey, it was really buying the first house, which I bought 4 days after I transitioned from prison to a halfway house. How I did it was I started preparing in 25 years before I got out. And I built this elaborate story that helped me advance the case for other people to believe in me. And I had to get unconventional financing, of course, to buy my first house. And there were other factors in play because it was the end of the recession. I was in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of the best real estate markets in the country. And I worked with a developer who agreed to finance me until I got credit. And I didn't use a penny of my own money. I completely built this on the strength of my character. And when he asked me why I wanted to do that, I said I need this to be a part of my story because as I work to try and change the system, I've got to persuade people on why they should work through Prison Professors programming. And made the case and bought the house and put a tenant in there as soon as I could and collected rent. And that rent I could use to pay the mortgage once I got a mortgage, conventional financing. And then I repeated the process and bought another house and then another house. And I don't even know how many houses I bought, but certainly over $10 million worth of real estate acquisitions over the course of my journey, and made some money because as those properties increased in value, my equity increased, and the income that I received from owning those properties paid down the debt. So I was making money by the asset value appreciating and reducing debt because of the income that was coming in from tenants. And when I decided to transition from real estate into other investment vehicles, for me, it started with stocks. I became an investor in technology companies, believing that technology really changes the world, and then also in crypto. I'm a long in size in Bitcoin, currently valued at a couple $1 million worth of Bitcoin. A little more than that in stocks, 3-4 million in stocks, depending on the day. So once you get like over $5 million in equity, right, you don't really need to work for money anymore, because the money works for you. I mean, I could sit here and look at the holdings right now that I have and just say, oh wow, I'm long Micron Technology, which I've been long for today. I'm up more than $100,000 in Micron today. Nvidia, which I've owned for quite a while, I'm up 5,000 more today. I'm long another company called Inventure, a little bit more of a speculative play. I'm down, I guess, 10 grand in that today. So, but every day, my equity is going to fluctuate between, on a great day, this is actually the best week I've ever had, where I'm up more than $500,000 in 1 week, but all of that is a result of the decisions that I made in prison. I learned to think differently in prison. I learned to develop skills when I was in prison. I learned to deploy those skills in creative ways that helped me become a taxpayer and helped me fund a life. My wife became a registered nurse, a master's educated registered nurse, while I was in prison. But she no longer works. We get to spend all of our time together working to try and change America's prison system. And to do that, we launched a nonprofit where I devote all of my time and energy to right now, with hopes of helping end what I call intergenerational cycles of recidivism and poverty. And I try to share this message with as many people as possible to influence them that, hey, it's very tough that you went to prison, but you can't cry about it. You can't change the past. You've got to sow seeds for a better future. And in all of the books and courses that we write, 100% for free, I just try and be an ambassador for that message, much like Frederick Douglass or Nelson Mandela were ambassadors for me. And, started with the Bible and what I learned when I was in solitary confinement during my first year. So I hope that you find that video responsive to your question on how did I go from a 45-year sentence to earning freedom. Freedom is a state of mind. Even while I was in prison, I felt as if I was the CEO of my life. And I hope that you feel as if you're the CEO of your life, and that you work through the first lesson in our curriculum, which is called the playbook, Become the CEO of Your Life. I would really encourage you to memorialize your journey. That will become a very powerful asset to you in the future, and it will empower you to work towards better outcomes. I am Michael Santos, founder of Prison Professors, and I believe in you. Be cool.